He first knew the gods had gone silent during a storm. He was 12 years old, standing beneath the portico of his father's house on the Caelian hill, while rain fell in hard white lines over Rome. The gutters overflowed. Lightning struck somewhere beyond the Capitoline. Slaves crossed themselves in the old way, fingers to brow, to breast, to shoulder, not Christian yet, but afraid. Gaius Valerius Marcellus lifted his eyes toward the dark sky and waited for Jupiter to speak. When he was younger, thunder had felt like language. The sky had been articulate then, angry perhaps, but alive. Priests could read it. Augurs could interpret the jagged script of lightning against cloud. Rome was governed by signs, and the gods had not been shy. But this storm felt different. It was noise without meaning. He waited. Nothing came. His father, a senator hardened by campaigns along the Danube under Marcus Aurelius, joined him beneath the portico. "You are listening," his father said. "Yes." "And what do you hear?" "Only rain." His father nodded once, as if that answer had weight. The Antonine Plague had already hollowed the city by then. Funeral smoke clung to the hills. Markets had thinned. Temples were crowded, but the offerings felt frantic. Animals slaughtered not in gratitude, but in desperation. The gods were petitioned, bribed, threatened. They did not answer. Marcus Aurelius still ruled. The emperor-philosopher wrote about endurance and reason, while the empire coughed blood. Stoicism offered dignity. It did not offer comfort. In those years, something shifted in Rome's air. It was not only disease, it was doubt. Gaius would later read the philosophers who tried to explain this shift. They spoke of a thinning veil between worlds, of daimons, intermediate beings, moving closer to human affairs. Not the gentle guiding spirits of earlier centuries, but restless intelligences, hungry ones. Even as a boy, he felt it. At night, he began to dream of figures standing just beyond the edge of lamplight. They were not gods. They did not possess the clean radiance of Apollo or the measured gravity of Jupiter. These presences were ambiguous, watching. When he told his tutor, the man frowned and quoted Plato. "Between gods and men are intermediaries. Not all are benevolent." "Are they demons?" Gaius asked. The tutor hesitated. "Daemon means spirit. It does not yet mean what you fear." "Not yet. Not." Rome, under Marcus Aurelius, still performed the rites, still poured wine, still crowned statues with laurel. But the confidence of earlier centuries, the easy assumption that the gods stood firmly behind the empire, had begun to fray. War pressed at the frontiers. The Marcomanni tested the Danube. Soldiers returned with strange cults in their baggage, Mithras from the east, Egyptian mysteries, whispers of salvation that required initiation rather than citizenship. Religion was becoming private. The old civic gods belonged to the Senate and the state. The new cults promised transformation of the soul. Gaius felt that distinction in his bones. When his father died, fever taking him in 3 days, the family sacrificed a white bull to Jupiter Optimus Maximus. The priest examined the entrails. His face did not change, but his silence did. "What do the signs say?" Gaius demanded. "They are unclear." Unclear. That word would follow him through his life, like a shadow. In the months after his father's death, Gaius walked alone through the Forum at dusk. The temples still stood, but he felt them as facades. Behind their columns lay emptiness. Or worse, not emptiness, but vacancy. The gods had withdrawn. He did not speak this thought aloud. To do so would have been treason against ancestry. His family had traced its line to consuls and priests. They had maintained shrines in their atrium for generations. The household gods, the lares and penates, still received daily offerings. Yet even there, in the private flicker of oil lamps before small clay figures, he felt no response, and into that silence crept something else, a sense of proximity. The philosophers would later call it anxiety, a pervasive spiritual tension of the age. The cosmos no longer felt stable. Fate seemed erratic, fortune arbitrary, the divine remote. In that vacuum, lesser powers gathered. He began to notice how often people spoke of possession, of curses, of unseen forces pressing against sleep. Oracles grew evasive, dreams grew vivid. Once in the Subura, he saw a woman writhing on the pavement, her voice guttural and wrong. A man in a coarse tunic, one of the Christians, he would later learn, laid hands on her, and commanded something to depart. The crowd gasped. The woman stilled. Gaius watched the Christian's face. It did not show triumph. It showed certainty. Certainty terrified him more than silence. He asked his tutor about these Christians. "They deny the gods," the tutor said. "They call them demons. Are they wrong?" The tutor's jaw tightened. "They are dangerous. Dangerous not because they killed, but because they named. If Jupiter was not a god but a daemon, if Apollo was not divine but deceptive, then Rome's entire spiritual architecture shifted. The silence of the gods would no longer be mystery. It would be exposure." Gaius lay awake that night, listening to Rome breathe in the dark. Somewhere a dog barked. Somewhere a woman cried. The empire seemed vast and fragile at once. He whispered a prayer. Not loudly, not formally, just a small plea into the dark. No answer came, but he felt watched, and for the first time he was not certain by whom. He grew into manhood beneath the shadow of Marcus Aurelius's final campaigns. The emperor was old, and the empire was tired. From the north came stories of cold forests and harder men. From the east, rumors of strange gods who promised immortality not through memory, but through rebirth. From within Rome itself, the plague moved like an invisible legion, cutting through rich and poor with equal indifference. The smoke of pyres no longer shocked anyone. It became part of the city's scent, charred cedar and flesh. Gaius entered public life at 25, his name added to the rolls of minor magistrates. He learned to speak in measured tones. He learned the art of piety, how to stand before an altar without revealing doubt, how to pour wine without letting the tremor show in his hand. But his dreams intensified. In them he walked through temples whose statues had no faces. The marble bodies were intact, but the features were smooth, blank, as if erased by a patient hand. When he approached, a whisper rose, not from the statues, but from beneath them, from the hollow pedestals. "We were never what you thought." He woke with his heart racing, skin damp, convinced for a moment that someone stood beside his bed. Sometimes he would light a lamp and scan the room, half expecting to see a shape retreating into shadow. He did not tell anyone about the dreams. Instead, he sought philosophy. Stoicism had sustained his father, but Stoicism now felt insufficient, too dry for the fever of the age. Its gods were abstractions, its providence impersonal. It asked men to endure, not to understand. He turned instead to the Neoplatonists, whose lectures were gaining attention in Rome. They spoke of the one, transcendent, ineffable, beyond form. From the one flowed intellect, from intellect soul, and from soul the material world. The old gods, they argued, were expressions, emanations, intelligible principles clothed in myth. It was elegant, it was grand, it also moved the divine even farther away. If the highest principle was beyond being, beyond name, then Jupiter's thunder was no longer Jupiter's voice. It was a shadow of a shadow of a shadow. Still, Gaius felt drawn to this system. It acknowledged the instability he sensed. It admitted hierarchy within the spiritual realm, orders of beings, mediators between humanity and the ineffable. And among those mediators were daimons, not evil, necessarily, not yet, but morally ambiguous, capable of guidance or corruption. Some attached themselves to individuals, shaping temperament, whispering impulses. Gaius began to wonder whether his dreams were not mere imagination, but contact. He visited a philosopher named Ammonius, aged, sharp-eyed, smelling faintly of incense and old parchment. In a shaded courtyard they spoke of the soul's ascent. "The world is not empty," Ammonius said. "It is crowded, with gods, with beings." The distinction chilled him. "Are they benevolent?" Ammonius smiled faintly. "Some are indifferent. Some are drawn to human passion. The impure are attracted to impurity." That night, Gaius lay awake longer than usual. He examined his own heart as if it were a battlefield. Was there impurity? Of course. Anger, envy, pride, but also longing. Was longing impurity? Was desire itself an invitation? In the streets, the Christians multiplied. They met quietly. They spoke of a single God who had entered history, who had suffered, who would judge. Their doctrine was not abstract. It was urgent. More troubling still, they spoke of demons, not daimons, in the neutral philosophical sense, but demons, malevolent spirits masquerading as gods. The old deities were not distant. They were dangerous. Their silence was not absence, but deception. This language spread like dry firewood catching flame. Gaius heard it in the market. He heard it in whispers among slaves. He even heard it among minor officials. Christianity offered explanation. It named the fear. Plague, demonic corruption of the air. War, judgment, taught he. The collapse of old confidence, the exposure of lies. Gaius attended, in secret, one of their gatherings. It was held in the back room of a warehouse near the Tiber. Oil lamps smoked. The air was thick. A man in plain robes read from a letter attributed to Paul of Tarsus. The words were severe, but alive. They cut. Then the bishop, Lucius, rose. He was not physically imposing. Slight of frame, eyes dark and watchful. His voice, however, held command. The gods you fear, Lucius said, are not gods. They are powers who seek your allegiance. They thrive on sacrifice. They thrive on your anxiety. Gaius felt heat rise in his chest. You feel silence, Lucius continued, scanning the room. You feel abandonment. That is because the true God does not compete in the market of idols. There was murmured assent. The demons are loud. The true God is not. Gaius's heart pounded. How could this man know? Afterward, he lingered near the doorway. Lucius approached him. You are not one of us, the bishop said quietly. No, but you are searching. Gaius held the bishop's gaze. You speak of demons as if you have seen them. Lucius's expression did not change. I have seen what they do. To whom? To the empire. It was a bold answer. Gaius left, unsettled. The Christians did not tremble before daemons. They confronted them. They performed exorcisms. They named and expelled. Their certainty was a weapon. Yet, there was something in Lucius that troubled him. A precision. A calculation. The bishop did not merely preach faith. He organized. He mapped influence. He cultivated the disillusioned. Was that holy zeal, or political ambition cloaked in sanctity? The empire shifted under Commodus, then fractured under successive claimants. Emperors rose and fell like brittle statues. Assassination replaced stability. The Pax Romana thinned. With each upheaval, temples grew more crowded and more desperate. Gaius returned often to the Capitoline. He stood beneath Jupiter's vast image and searched for presence. He examined his own silence. Speak, he whispered once, barely audible. The marble stared forward. Behind him, in the shadows of the colonnade, he thought he heard a breath. He turned sharply. No one stood there, but the air felt charged, thick as before a storm. The gods had gone silent. The beings had not. The first time Gaius believed he saw one, he was 43 years old. Rome had survived Commodus. It had survived Pertinax, Didius Julianus, Septimius Severus. It had survived civil war like a body surviving fever, alive, but altered. Emperors now wore power like armor, not dignity. Legions made and unmade rulers. The old confidence, the quiet assumption that the gods endorsed Rome's dominion, had thinned to ritual habit, and through it all, the language of spirits intensified. It was no longer philosophers alone who spoke of daimons. It was bakers, soldiers, matrons. The world felt porous. Men blamed unseen forces for impulses they did not understand. Women feared that shadows moved independently of light. Gaius told himself he was immune to contagion of the mind. Then came the night of the fever. He had traveled south to his estate in Campania. The vineyards were heavy with fruit. The sky was clean and wide. For a few days he felt almost restored. Away from Rome, away from argument, the old rhythms of land and labor soothed him. But the fever struck without warning. It began with heat behind the eyes, then spread downward. He lay on a couch in the villa's atrium, while physicians muttered about humors and balance. Sweat soaked the linen beneath him. His vision blurred. As night deepened, he felt a presence gather at the edge of consciousness. Not dream, not imagination, a density. The room's lamplight flickered, though no wind touched the flame. He tried to lift his head, and found he could not. His limbs felt weighted, pinned, and then he saw it. At the threshold of the atrium stood a shape darker than the surrounding dark, not formed clearly enough to name, but distinct enough to know. It did not move. It did not need to. He felt not terror, but recognition. You have been listening. The thought did not come in words, yet it carried meaning. He attempted to call for a slave. His throat constricted. The figure did not advance. It did not retreat. You have called into silence. The sensation was neither benevolent nor overtly hostile. It was curious. Who are you? He rasped. The air thickened. The presence seemed almost amused. We are what remains when gods are doubted. His fever spiked. Sweat poured down his neck. His mind scrambled for philosophical categories. Daemon, intermediary, projection of delirium. It did not matter. He felt something press against the interior of his thoughts. Testing. Do you still believe in Jupiter? He tried to summon indignation. Instead he felt exhaustion. I believe, he whispered. Though even to himself, the words sounded thin. The shape dissolved, not abruptly, but as mist thins at dawn. He woke at first light, weak, but lucid. The fever broke by midday. Physicians attributed his vision to heat and imbalance. His steward suggested prayer to Asclepius. Gaius said nothing, but he could not dismiss what he had experienced. Dodds, though Gaius did not know that name, would later describe this age as one of anxiety, when the boundary between rational explanation and supernatural fear grew unstable. Men who had once trusted civic ritual began to seek personal assurance. The cosmos no longer felt orderly. It felt volatile. Gaius felt that volatility in his own body. If the old gods had withdrawn, had lesser powers moved forward to occupy the vacuum, Neoplatonism offered structure, higher and lower orders, ascent and purification. But it did not promise protection. The philosopher Ammonius spoke of aligning the soul with intellect, transcending the material. But transcendence required discipline, beyond Gaius's temperament. Christianity, meanwhile, offered confrontation. He heard of exorcisms performed openly now, not in secret rooms, but in courtyards. Demons named, commanded, expelled in the name of Christ. The Christians framed the entire cosmos as a battlefield between God and rebellious spirits. The language of war was familiar to Rome. Gaius sought out Bishop Lucius again. They met in the bishop's modest residence near the Aventine. The room was simple, wooden table, scrolls stacked neatly, a cross carved into plaster. You look unwell, Lucius observed. I was, Gaius replied. I saw something. Lucius did not ask what. You have been probing the invisible, the bishop said instead. It probes back. You claim your God commands these spirits. I claim nothing. I testify. To what? That the powers you fear are not sovereign. Gaius studied him carefully. And you are not afraid? Lucius's eyes flickered, only slightly. Fear is natural. Submission is not. There it was again, that certainty. Gaius leaned forward. If your God is supreme, why does he permit such anxiety? Why this confusion? Why silence? Lucius's answer came slowly. Because the silence exposes false loyalties. Gaius felt anger rise. You call my ancestors' faith false? I call it incomplete. Incomplete, Gaius repeated softly. That is a convenient word. Lucius held his gaze. You have felt the old forms hollow out. You have felt the nearness of something else. You stand between worlds. Between worlds. Yes. That was precisely the sensation. Not fully pagan. Not willing to kneel before Christ. Suspended. Do you ever doubt? Gaius asked suddenly. Lucius's jaw tightened. For a moment, the mask slipped. Doubt is a temptation, he said carefully. Is it? The bishop did not answer. Outside, Rome murmured. Inside, the air felt taut. Gaius left more unsettled than before. If the Christians were right, then the old gods were not silent. They were exposed. If the philosophers were right, then anxiety was the natural result of souls misaligned with higher reality. But if neither was fully right, what if the age itself, its plagues, wars, instability, had cracked something deeper? He returned to Campania weeks later. He stood in the vineyard at dusk, watching light drain from sky. Are you there? He whispered. Not to Jupiter, not to Christ, but to whatever might answer. The wind moved through leaves. No voice came, but the sense of being observed remained. Not by a god, by something patient. The empire aged with him. By the time Gaius reached his 50th year, Rome no longer resembled the Rome of his youth. The marble still gleamed in sunlight. The Senate still convened. Sacrifices still smoked on temple altars. But beneath the surface, continuity felt staged. Septimius Severus had hardened imperial rule. Soldiers had become kingmakers. Loyalty followed pay more readily than piety. And throughout the provinces, new religious movements braided themselves into daily life. Mystery cults promised ascent beyond death. Astrologers mapped destiny in constellations. Magicians sold amulets against unseen forces. Anxiety had become commerce. Gaius increasingly withdrew from public ceremony. His obligations continued. He presided over games, sponsored restorations, oversaw civic accounts, but the old gestures felt theatrical. Instead, he turned more deeply to philosophy. Ammonius had died. In his place, a younger teacher, Plotinus, drew a small circle of devoted students. Gaius attended discreetly, sitting among equestrians and aspiring intellectuals in a modest room, heavy with oil smoke. Plotinus spoke of ascent. The soul, he said, has forgotten its origin. It wanders in multiplicity, mistaking fragments for wholeness. Anxiety is the sign of that forgetfulness. Then the solution is memory? A student asked. Purification, Plotinus replied, turning inward and upward. There was something bracing in this. The problem was not the silence of the gods, but the noise of the cell. Gaius committed himself to discipline. He fasted. He limited wine. He practiced interior concentration. He examined thoughts as if they were intruders at the gate. For brief intervals, he felt clarity. Moments when the world's edges softened, and an underlying unity seemed almost perceptible. Not a god in marble, not a demon in shadow. Something vast, impersonal, luminous. Then the moment would pass. Anxiety returned. He confessed one evening to Plotinus the vision he had experienced during fever. The philosopher listened without interruption. What you describe, Plotinus said finally, may have been a lower spirit, or it may have been your own imagination clothed in symbol. It spoke, Gaius insisted. Many things speak when the body is weakened. Do you deny the existence of malevolent daemons? Plotinus's gaze sharpened. I deny their sovereignty. Lower beings exist. They are drawn to passion, but fear magnifies them. Christians say these spirits are enemies of a supreme God. Christians divide the cosmos too sharply, Plotinus said. They mistake metaphor for ontology. Yet, they expel these spirits. So do magicians, Plotinus replied dryly. Power does not prove truth. Gaius left unsettled once more. Philosophy offered altitude. Christianity offered certainty. Pagan ritual offered continuity. None restored the confidence of his youth. Meanwhile, the Christians organized. Bishop Lucius expanded his network. He mediated disputes. He arranged relief for widows and orphans. He corresponded with other bishops across the empire. His influence grew not only spiritually, but socially. Gaius observed this with wary admiration. The church was becoming structure, and structure, in an anxious age, becomes refuge. Yet rumors circulated. Lucius had intervened in property disputes, persuading wealthy converts to bequeath estates to the church. He counseled magistrates privately. He seemed to understand the shifting political winds with unusual precision. One evening, Gaius confronted him. You preach humility, Gaius said, yet your influence expands. Lucius did not deny it. Order is necessary, the bishop replied. The empire falters. Souls require shepherds, or managers. Lucius smiled faintly. Do you believe shepherds lack strategy? There was steel beneath the gentleness. You condemn the old gods as demons, Gaius pressed. Yet you wield fear to consolidate loyalty. I name danger, Lucius said. Would you prefer I leave men unarmed? Against what? Against powers that feed on confusion. Gaius studied him. And you are immune? Lucius's eyes hardened for an instant. No man is immune. It was the most honest answer Gaius had heard from him. Political tremors intensified. Caracalla's reign brought bloodshed and erratic decrees. Then came the crisis of the 3rd century. Emperors rising and dying with brutal rapidity. Provinces declared independence. Borders fractured. The empire's body convulsed. In such times, religion does not remain theoretical. Soldiers carried amulets. Governors consulted astrologers. Households invoked both Jupiter and Christ in whispered contingency. Gaius felt the demonic fear thicken in the air. It was not merely superstition. It was existential. The world felt unstable at its foundations. The old cosmology, ordered, tiered, supported by tradition, no longer felt reliable. In dreams, He returned to the faceless statues. This time, however, the pedestals cracked. From within emerged figures not of marble but shadow, twisting upward like smoke given intent. He awoke, gasping. He stood before his household shrine that morning, and hesitated before lighting incense. Was he feeding something? He lit it anyway. Smoke curled upward. He watched it dissipate. "Are you gods?" he whispered to the small figures of lairs, "or masks?" The only answer was the faint hiss of oil in flame. Outside, the empire groaned. Inside, his certainty thinned. He had sought transcendence through philosophy. He had tested confrontation through Christian rhetoric. He had maintained ritual through habit. Still, the silence persisted, and beneath it, something patient waited. The 3rd century did not break Rome in a single blow. It eroded her. When Valerian was captured by the Persians and humiliated, paraded, so rumor said, as a footstool for a foreign king, Gaius felt something collapse that no ritual could restore. An emperor taken alive. It was not merely military defeat. It was metaphysical embarrassment. If Jupiter guarded Rome, how had this been permitted? If Fortuna favored the city, why had she turned so decisively? The old formulas, the gods test us, the gods punish us, the gods correct us, began to sound like strained explanations offered after the fact. The empire fractured into rival regimes. In Gaul, Postumus declared himself emperor. In the east, Zenobia rose in Palmyra. Rome still stood, but she no longer commanded instinctive awe. Gaius, now in his 60s, moved more slowly through the forum. He saw cracks in stone where once he had seen only permanence. He saw temples repaired not out of devotion, but out of fear. Fear had become the empire's most common offering. He attended a public sacrifice during Aurelian's reign. The emperor, vigorous, stern, sought to restore unity through the cult of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, a single radiant deity to bind the fractured state. The symbolism was powerful. The sun above all, one source of light, one sovereign force. The crowd murmured approval. Gaius felt, briefly, something stir, an old reflex of hope. Perhaps Rome required simplification. Perhaps the many gods had diluted conviction. Perhaps a singular focus would rekindle certainty. But when the bull was slaughtered, and the priest examined its entrails, the expression was once again unreadable. Unclear. Always unclear. Later that night, Gaius dreamed of the sun. It rose vast and golden over Rome, but as it climbed, its light grew cold. The orb hardened, dimmed and fractured into smaller spheres that fell like embers into the city below. Each ember, upon touching ground, became a face. Not human, not divine. Watching, he woke with the taste of iron in his mouth. The language of demons intensified in Christian preaching during these years. Persecutions flared intermittently, sometimes local, sometimes imperial, but they did not extinguish the movement. If anything, martyrdom sharpened Christian identity. Gaius witnessed one execution in the circus. A young woman, no older than 20, refused to sacrifice to the imperial image. She stood calm while the magistrate pressed her. Her refusal was not hysterical. It was steady. When the beasts were released, the crowd expected screams. There were none. The girl's final cry was not to Jupiter, not to Sol, but to Christ. Gaius felt something inside him twist. Was that courage delusion? Or contact? He sought out Lucius again. The bishop had aged as well, his hair silvered, his posture slightly bent, but his eyes remained sharp. "You admire them," Lucius said quietly after Gaius described the execution. "I admire resolve," Gaius replied. "I question its source." "You have seen your gods fail to defend emperors," Lucius said. "You have seen plague and humiliation. Yet you hesitate." "Because I have also seen ambition cloaked in sanctity," Gaius answered. Lucius did not deny it. "The church is composed of men," he said. "Men desire influence." "And you?" Gaius pressed. Lucius's gaze did not waver. "I desire order in chaos." "Is that faith or governance? Must it be separate?" The question lingered between them. Outside, Rome trembled under successive claimants to power. Coins bore new faces with dizzying speed. Loyalty became fluid. The gods, once guarantors of imperial stability, seemed increasingly symbolic. And in that symbolic space, demonic fear found fertile ground. Reports spread of hauntings, of strange lights in abandoned villas, of voices in empty shrines. Astrologers claimed the heavens were misaligned. Comets were interpreted as omens of collapse. Gaius walked one evening through the Campus Martius at twilight. The air was thick, heavy with approaching storm. He paused before a small neglected shrine to Mars. The statue inside was chipped, paint faded. He felt sudden anger. "Were you ever there?" he demanded softly. "Or were we speaking to ourselves?" Thunder rolled distantly. No answer. But behind him, footsteps sounded. He turned. No one. The sensation returned, that patient proximity. He closed his eyes and for the first time addressed not Jupiter, not Saul, not Christ, but the presence itself. "What do you want?" The air seemed to tighten. Not worship, recognition. His breath caught. Recognition of what? That the age had shifted, that the old language no longer bound reality, that men who clung to vanished forms created their own torment. He felt suddenly very tired. Perhaps the demons Christians named were not separate beings at all. Perhaps they were the psychic residue of a civilization losing coherence. Fear given shape. Yet that explanation did not dispel the dread. The crisis of the 3rd century did not merely threaten Rome's borders. It unsettled Rome's metaphysics. When emperors fell like leaves, when provinces splintered, when plague returned in waves, men sought stability beyond civic ritual. Christianity offered that stability. Neoplatonism offered transcendence. The old paganism offered continuity. Gaius felt himself suspended among all three, believing in none fully, abandoning none entirely. The storm broke overhead. Rain lashed the campus. Lightning split the sky. For an instant, the world was illuminated in white. And in that flash, he thought he saw figures standing between the columns of distant temples. Not gods, not men, watching Rome tremble. Diocletian brought order. Not peace, order. By the time Gaius entered his 70s, the empire had been reshaped by iron will. The tetrarchy divided power among 4 rulers, a practical solution to chaos. Borders were reinforced. Administration tightened. Taxes became precise, inescapable. And religion returned to center stage, not as philosophy, not as personal longing, but as state necessity. Diocletian believed Rome's instability had spiritual roots. The gods had been neglected. Christian refusal to sacrifice threatened divine favor. The empire required harmony with the divine powers that sustained it. For a moment, just a moment, Gaius felt vindicated. The old rites would be restored. The temples would regain primacy. Civic religion would once again anchor public life. The gods had not abandoned Rome. Rome had drifted. Then the edicts came. Christian scriptures were to be burned. Churches demolished. Clergy imprisoned. Citizens required to sacrifice publicly to the traditional gods. What had begun as restoration hardened into persecution. Gaius watched the machinery of suppression with unease. He had never embraced Christianity, but neither had he desired blood. He stood in the forum one morning, as soldiers erected an altar before the basilica. Citizens were summoned in sequence. Grain, incense, wine, offered before magistrates to prove loyalty. Some complied with weary resignation. Some trembled. Some refused. The refusal no longer seemed theatrical. It seemed inevitable. Bishop Lucius had grown frail. His congregation urged him to flee. He did not. When soldiers came to seize him, Gaius was present. Lucius did not resist. He walked between them with surprising steadiness. Their hands gripped his arms firmly, but not cruelly. There was no mob, only watchful silence. Their eyes met as Lucius passed. There was no accusation there. Only, strangely, pity. Gaius felt the sting of it. He followed at a distance as the bishop was taken to a holding cell beneath the praetorium. He used his influence to gain a private audience. Lucius sat on a rough bench, wrists bound but posture erect. "You could end this," Gaius said quietly. "Offer a handful of incense. It need not mean belief." Lucius smiled faintly. "You still misunderstand. It is ritual," Gaius insisted. "Gesture. Gesture shapes allegiance," Lucius replied. "The old gods demand token loyalty. That is how demons operate, through small concessions." "You still call them demons," Gaius said sharply. "Have you ever questioned that?" Lucius's gaze did not waver. "I have wrestled with doubt more than you know." It was the first time he admitted it openly. And, Gaius pressed, and doubt clarified what fear obscured. Gaius leaned closer. Do you ever fear that what you call demons are merely the echo of our own fragmentation? That we are fighting ourselves? Lucius's expression shifted, just slightly. Self-deception is the oldest demon, he said softly. And power? Gaius asked. Lucius exhaled slowly. Power tempts the church as it tempts the state. There it was again, ambiguity. You desire order, Gaius said, even if that order replaces Rome. I desire a kingdom not built on coercion, Lucius answered. And yet your followers multiply under persecution. Truth often does. Gaius studied him in the dim light. You are certain, he said at last. No, Lucius replied quietly. I am committed. The distinction unsettled him more than certainty would have. Lucius was executed weeks later, not torn by beasts, not burned, but beheaded quietly at dawn. The state had learned efficiency. Gaius did not attend. He walked instead through the streets as Christian houses were searched, scriptures seized, altars smashed. Smoke rose from burning scrolls. He felt no triumph. He felt the old anxiety deepen. The persecution did not restore pagan confidence. It intensified spiritual polarization. The language of demons sharpened. Christians interpreted suffering as proof of cosmic conflict. Pagans interpreted resistance as stubborn impiety threatening Rome's survival. The empire seemed less unified than ever. One night, long after Lucius's death, Gaius dreamed again. He stood in the forum. The temples were intact. The statues gleamed. But as he approached Jupiter's image, the marble cracked, not violently, but with slow, spreading fissures. From within did not emerge shadow. Instead, a mirror. He saw himself reflected in the hollow core, not as senator, not as philosopher, but as a man suspended between allegiance and fear. Behind his reflection, faint shapes moved, neither gods nor demons clearly formed. Watching, he woke before dawn. For the first time, he did not light incense. He sat in silence and let the silence remain. Outside, the empire continued its struggle to hold form. Inside, Gaius felt something shift. Not resolution, not conversion, but the recognition that the old framework could no longer contain the age. The gods had gone silent, but the world had not, and something new was rising, not merely Christianity, not merely imperial reform, but a redefinition of the sacred itself. He feared it. He also sensed he would live long enough to see its triumph. The persecutions did not end Christianity. They refined it. When Diocletian abdicated and the tetrarchy began to fracture, the machinery of suppression faltered. Governors enforced edicts unevenly. Some relented, some intensified. The empire's hand, once firm, trembled again. Gaius, now approaching 80, moved through Rome like a relic of another age. Young magistrates treated him with reverence tinged with impatience. His counsel was sought ceremonially, rarely followed. He observed quietly. Christian gatherings resumed in subtler forms. Burned scrolls were replaced by copies smuggled from other cities. The church had learned resilience under pressure. Its structure, so carefully cultivated by men like Lucius, proved durable. The absence of Lucius lingered in Gaius's mind. He had not wept at the bishop's execution. He had not rejoiced either. Instead, he felt a hollow recognition that a man could hold conviction without clarity and power without overt corruption. Lucius had been morally ambiguous, not saint, not schemer, but something in between. He had organized and believed simultaneously. He had doubted and acted. Gaius respected that more now than he wished to admit. One evening, he visited the site where Lucius had once preached. The house had been repaired. New faces gathered. A younger bishop presided, less subtle, more fervent. His language was sharper. The demons are exposed, the young bishop declared. The empire's turmoil reveals the impotence of false gods. The congregation murmured assent. Gaius felt a flicker of discomfort. The new tone lacked Lucius's restraint. Where Lucius had acknowledged doubt, this bishop wielded denunciation like a blade. Outside, Rome's political landscape shifted once more. Constantine rose, first as one of several claimants, then as dominant force. His campaigns were decisive, his ambition unmistakable. Rumors reached Rome before his legions did. A vision in the sky, a sign, a cross of light above the sun. In this sign, conquer. Gaius heard the story from multiple mouths. each version embellished slightly differently. Some claimed the sign appeared at noon. Others insisted it came in a dream. Some said Constantine hesitated before embracing it. Others declared immediate conversion. What mattered was not precision. What mattered was interpretation. If the emperor had seen the Christian symbol in the heavens, if victory followed, then divine favor had shifted unmistakably. The old gods, silent during plague and humiliation, now faced a rival who claimed direct intervention. Gaius stood on the Palatine as Constantine entered Rome after defeating Maxentius at the Milvian Bridge. The city erupted in cautious celebration. Standards bore unfamiliar symbols alongside traditional emblems. He watched the emperor pass. Constantine did not kneel before Jupiter's altar. He acknowledged the Senate. He accepted acclamations. But his gaze was elsewhere. Soon after, edicts were issued, not persecuting pagans, not abolishing temples, but granting legal status to Christianity. Property returned. Clergy restored. Tolerance. It sounded moderate. It felt seismic. For the first time, the church stood not beneath threat, but beside power. Gaius sensed the axis of the world tilt. He walked again to the Capitoline temple. The great statue of Jupiter remained imposing. The rituals continued, but the crowd felt thinner, the fervor muted. He turned toward a nearby Christian gathering place, newly renovated, more open than before. Inside, voices rose in structured chant. He did not enter. Instead, he stood between temple and church, feeling the air. Was this the end of paganism? No. The old rites persisted. Philosophers continued to lecture. Neoplatonism flourished under new patronage. But something essential had shifted. Confidence. The Christians no longer spoke as marginal dissenters. They spoke as participants in imperial destiny. And that changed the tone of their certainty. Gaius dreamed again. This time, the forum was empty. In the center stood two figures, one clothed in radiant light, the other in familiar shadow. They did not fight. They observed each other. And between them stood Rome, translucent, trembling. He woke with a realization that unsettled him deeply. Perhaps the gods had not gone silent. Perhaps they had retreated because Rome's understanding of them had fractured. Perhaps the demonic presence he had sensed for decades was not invasion, but transformation. He walked to his household shrine that morning. He looked at the small figures of his ancestors' gods. He did not remove them. He did not replace them. He simply sat. The empire had entered a new age. He had lived long enough to see pagan confidence erode, Christian certainty ascend, and imperial power recalibrate around new symbols. Yet the core tension within him remained unresolved. If the old gods were false, then generations had built Rome on illusion. If the Christians were right, then silence had been judgment. If the philosophers were right, then all this was shadow play beneath an ineffable one. He felt neither condemned nor saved, only suspended. And in that suspension, the anxiety of the age crystallized, not as panic, but as awareness that history itself had become theological. The sacred was being renegotiated, and he, an old man, stood unwilling to surrender either memory or doubt. Constantine did not abolish the old gods. He eclipsed them. The temples remained open. Sacrifices continued in muted rhythm. Philosophers lectured without interruption. Yet something subtle and irreversible had occurred. The divine had become imperial in a new way. Where once emperors bowed before Jupiter, Constantine spoke as one chosen by a singular god. Not merely favored, chosen. The difference unsettled Gaius profoundly. Favor implied reciprocity. Choice implied direction. Christian symbols began appearing on standards, on coins, in court language. Bishops were summoned to advise. Disputes within the church became matters of imperial concern. The sacred had entered the machinery of state, not as ornament, but as foundation. Gaius attended, as observer, a public assembly where Christian clergy debated doctrine before imperial representatives. The matter concerned the nature of Christ, fully divine, fully human, or something between. The intensity astonished him. These were not abstract quarrels. Voices trembled. Accusations flew. Appeals to scripture clashed with appeals to reason. And above it all hovered the unspoken reality. The emperor desired unity. Unity demanded definition. Definition required exclusion. Gaius felt the old anxiety return, not as fear of demons, but as recognition that certainty, once enthroned, can become coercive. After the assembly, he encountered Bishop Marcus, the younger successor to Lucius. "You have influence," Gaius said quietly, "more than Lucius ever possessed." Marcus did not deny it. "The emperor seeks guidance," Marcus replied, "and you provide it. We provide truth." When Gaius studied him, truth, enforced by law. Marcus's gaze sharpened. "Error harms souls. So does compulsion." "Would you leave the empire spiritually fractured?" Marcus asked. "Perhaps fracture is honest," Gaius said. Marcus's lips tightened. "Your generation mistook ambiguity for depth, and yours mistakes conviction for clarity," Gaius replied softly. They parted without resolution. That night, Gaius dreamed not of shadows or statues, but of a council chamber. At the head sat Constantine, luminous, distant. On one side gathered bishops robed in white. On the other stood philosophers in muted cloaks. Between them lay a single word written in light: truth. Each side reached toward it. The word fractured. From its fragments rose faces, gods, demons, men, all interwoven. He woke trembling. The demonic fear of his youth had transformed. He no longer sensed beings pressing at the threshold. Instead, he sensed ideologies hardening, metaphysics crystallizing into law. The invisible had become institutional. He walked through Rome the following morning with deliberate slowness. The Capitoline temple still stood, but its steps were sparsely trod. Nearby, a newly constructed basilica filled with worshippers. The sound of Christian hymnody drifted across the forum, unfamiliar yet compelling. He paused before the temple of Vesta. The sacred flame still burned, tended by aging priestesses. For a moment, he felt overwhelming tenderness. Not belief, tenderness. These rites had shaped centuries. They had given Rome coherence. They had provided language for gratitude and grief. Even if metaphysically incomplete, they had been humanly sufficient. Was sufficiency no longer enough? He returned home, and opened scrolls he had not touched in years. Homer, Virgil, Cicero. He read of piety as civic virtue, of gods entwined with destiny. Then he opened a Christian text, copied carefully, obtained through discreet channels. The Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word. The prose was austere, severe. It did not flatter Rome. It did not require empire. It claimed universality without ancestry. He felt both drawn and resistant. The silence of the old gods had once terrified him. Now he wondered whether that silence had been space. Space for reinterpretation, for transformation. But transformation into what? He lit no incense that evening. He did not pray. He simply sat in the fading light and allowed memory to move through him. Marcus Aurelius, writing by lamplight on campaign. Plague smoke rising over Rome. Lucius, standing calmly before execution. Constantine, riding beneath a new symbol. The age of anxiety had not ended. It had changed shape. Where once men feared demons in shadow, now they feared error in doctrine. Where once the gods seemed distant, now God seemed near. But defined, codified, enforced, he felt himself nearing his own end. The question that had haunted him since boyhood returned with quiet insistence. If the old gods are silent, and the new God is certain, where does doubt live? And more troubling still, is doubt a weakness, or the last honest refuge of a soul, unwilling to surrender complexity for comfort? Outside, bells rang from a Christian gathering place. Their sound carried across Rome. The city listened. So did he. Age narrowed the world. Gaius no longer attended every public debate. He no longer felt compelled to witness each new proclamation. His legs tired quickly. His breath shortened on hills he had once climbed without effort. But his mind sharpened. It sharpened because time thinned illusion. He had lived beneath Marcus Aurelius, seen plague hollow Rome, watched emperors collapse like poorly mortared walls, witnessed persecution flare and recede, and now observed Christianity move from hunted sect to imperial. Partner, ... The transformation was not theatrical. It was administrative. Clergy received privileges. Churches were granted land. Imperial correspondence referenced the Christian God without irony. Bishops traveled under state protection. The sacred had entered bureaucracy. One afternoon he received a formal invitation to attend a provincial synod convened to settle disputes among Christian factions. He hesitated, then accepted. The hall was modest, but full. Bishops argued not about demons in alleyways, but about the nature of divinity itself. Was Christ co-eternal with the Father? Subordinate? Begotten? Created? The vocabulary was precise, almost surgical. Gaius felt a strange displacement. In his youth, men had feared unseen spirits, clinging to threshold. Now they feared improper metaphysics. He leaned toward a bishop seated beside him. "You speak of the divine essence, as if dissecting it." Gaius murmured. "We defend truth," the bishop replied. "And if you err, then we endanger salvation." Salvation. The word still felt foreign to him. Paganism had promised favor, prosperity, harmony. Philosophy had promised ascent. Christianity promised salvation from corruption. Cosmic, moral, demonic. It was total. After the session, he walked alone, outside the hall. The sky hung low, pale, and unmoving. He felt no demonic presence now. That frightened him more than the earlier shadows. Had the beings retreated? Or had they simply changed form, inhabiting ideas rather than statues? He recalled Dodd's description, though again, he did not know the name, of an age in which men felt the cosmos pressing inward. Anxiety was not mere fear. It was awareness of instability beneath inherited forms. He had felt that instability when the gods fell silent. He felt it again now, when certainty grew loud. He sought out Bishop Marcus once more. They met in a courtyard scented with rosemary. "You have influence with the emperor," Gaius said. "I have access," Marcus corrected. "Access becomes influence." Marcus did not dispute it. "Tell me," Gaius said quietly, "when Christianity governs the empire, when doctrine is law, what becomes of doubt?" Marcus's expression hardened slightly. "Doubt must yield to truth. And if truth is contested, then councils define it." "Defined by men," Gaius said. "Guided by God." Gaius studied him. "And if the guiding voice is silent?" Marcus hesitated, barely perceptible. "God is not silent," he said firmly. Gaius felt a pang, not of disagreement, but of envy. To inhabit such certainty would be restful. Yet he remembered Lucius's admission. Doubt clarified what fear obscured. Marcus did not speak of doubt. He spoke of defense. That night, Gaius dreamed once more. He stood in the Capitoline temple, now empty. The statue of Jupiter had been removed, not smashed, simply gone. In its place stood a cross of carved wood. He approached. The wood began to breathe, not menacing, not divine, alive. From its grain emerged faces, Roman, Greek, Syrian, African, interwoven, taut. Behind them, faint outlines of old gods lingered, translucent. He reached out to touch the cross. It dissolved into light. He woke with tears on his cheeks. He was not weeping for Jupiter. He was not weeping for Christ. He was weeping for coherence. The empire no longer trembled as it had during the crisis. Constantine's rule stabilized administration. Borders held. Law resumed rhythm. But metaphysical stability felt less certain than ever. The old polytheistic flexibility had allowed ambiguity. Gods overlapped. Interpretations varied. One could doubt without exile. Monotheism narrowed the field. There was one God, one truth, one path, one. The psychological relief of that clarity was immense. So was its pressure. Gaius rose slowly from his couch and walked to his atrium. The household shrine remained, untouched for days now. He stood before it in the faint pre-dawn light. He did not light incense. He did not remove the figures. Instead, he spoke softly, not to Jupiter, not to Christ, but to the silence itself. "If you are there, whoever you are, grant me honesty." The silence did not answer. But for the first time in many years, he did not feel watched. He felt alone, and that aloneness, strangely, brought calm. Perhaps the demonic fear of his youth had been projection, anxiety given shape. Perhaps the god's silence had always been the same silence, uninterpreted until crisis forced interpretation. Perhaps the rise of Christianity was not conquest, but evolution of longing. He did not know. He would not know. But he sensed the end approaching, not only of his life, but of the Rome he had known. The age of anxiety had not been cured. It had been redirected. And he, an old Roman aristocrat, who believed in the old gods, yet felt their silence, stood as witness to the transformation. The question remained unresolved. It would die with him. Winter came harder in his 81st year. The cold did not merely bite. It settled into bone and remained. Gaius felt it in the mornings before light, when the house was still, and the servants moved quietly to tend fires. Constantine had consolidated power. Rival emperors had fallen. The cross, once whispered, once traced secretly, now appeared openly on imperial standards. The emperor did not forbid sacrifice to the old gods, but he no longer required it. The center had shifted, and with that shift, something subtle happened to paganism. It did not collapse. It faded. The Capitoline temple remained magnificent, but it no longer carried inevitability. Attendance thinned. The old formulas were recited, but their urgency felt ceremonial, almost nostalgic. Gaius attended one final public sacrifice to Jupiter. He stood among a small crowd, older men, a few priests, scattered citizens maintaining tradition. The bull was brought forward, garlanded. The knife flashed. Blood darkened stone. The priest examined the entrails. He hesitated only a moment, but Gaius saw it. Favorable, the priest declared. The word echoed hollow. Gaius felt no anger, only recognition. The language of divine favor had lost its gravity. Later that afternoon he walked toward the Lateran, where a grand Christian basilica had risen. Its size astonished him, not because it dwarfed temples, but because it did not imitate them. Its architecture spoke a different theological language. Interior space, gathered community, proclamation rather than offering. He entered. Light filtered through high windows. The air smelled of wax and breath. Voices rose in unified chant. He stood at the back. The bishop spoke of resurrection, not metaphorical ascent, but bodily transformation. Death would not dissolve the soul into abstraction. It would be overcome. The promise struck him with unexpected force. Paganism had promised continuity through memory and honor. Philosophy had promised absorption into the one. Christianity promised restoration. It was audacious. After the service, a deacon approached him. Young, respectful. You are Gaius Valerius Marcellus. I am. You have watched much. That is what old men do. The deacon smiled faintly. Do you believe? Gaius considered the question carefully. I believe Rome has changed, he said. That is not what I asked. No, Gaius agreed. It is not. He left before answering more. That night he dreamed not of statues or councils, but of his father. The old senator stood beneath the portico where Gaius had once listened for thunder. You are still listening, his father said. Yes. And what do you hear? Gaius strained. At first, nothing. Then, not a voice, not a command, but a subtle hum, like wind through distant columns. It is not silence, his father said gently. It is distance. Distance from what? From certainty. The dream dissolved. He woke with tears in his eyes. He understood something then. Not fully, but enough to steady him. The old gods had not necessarily gone silent. His understanding of them had been shaped by an age that believed divine favor guaranteed political stability. When that stability fractured, faith cracked with it. The Christians, emerging amid collapse, did not anchor faith to empire. They anchored it to narrative, incarnation, crucifixion, resurrection. Their God did not guarantee Rome. He transcended it. That distinction mattered. The demonic fear of his youth, the sense of shadowed beings pressing close, had thrived in the gap between collapsing structures and emerging meaning. Now, as Christianity solidified structure of its own, the demonic receded, not because demons vanished, but because explanation reabsorbed fear. Fear requires ambiguity. Doctrine reduces it. Yet doctrine also narrows possibility. Gaius rose slowly and walked to his atrium shrine one last time. He lifted one of the small figures, Jupiter, carved in simple clay. He weighed it in his palm. So much was built upon you, he murmured. He did not smash it. He did not discard it. He set it gently back in place. Then he did something he had never done before. He knelt, not before the shrine, not before the cross, but before the open space between them. I will not pretend certainty, he said aloud into the quiet house, but I will not cling to emptiness. He did not define what that meant. Perhaps it meant that faith need not be loud to endure. Perhaps it meant that silence was not absence, but invitation. Outside, Rome moved toward a future he would not see fully. Christianity would grow, councils would convene, emperors would legislate theology, pagan temples would close slowly, not with explosion, but with neglect. He would not witness the end. He had witnessed the transition, and in that witnessing he found, not resolution, but a kind of austere peace. The gods had seemed silent. Perhaps they had been speaking in a language his age could no longer hear. Perhaps they had been preparing Rome for something neither wholly pagan nor wholly Christian, but human. He closed his eyes. The anxiety that had haunted his youth no longer clawed at him. It remained, but softened. The empire would survive him. The sacred would change form again. And he, a Roman aristocrat who believed in the old gods yet felt their silence, would leave the question unresolved. Not conquered, not converted, simply honest. Spring returned, though Gaius felt it less vividly than in years past. His body had grown unreliable. His hands trembled when lifting cups. His breath shortened even at rest. The physicians spoke gently now. They no longer recommended vigorous remedies. They advised comfort. He had entered the afterlife of the living, present, but already receding. Constantine convened a great council in Nicaea. The news reached Rome in waves, first as rumor, then as confirmed proclamation. Bishops from across the empire summoned to settle the matter of Christ's nature once and for all. Once and for all. Gaius felt a faint smile tug at his lips when he heard the phrase. Human beings had always sought finality in matters of the divine, yet every age discovered its own incompleteness. Still, Nicaea was different. An emperor presided. The sacred had moved from marginal gatherings and whispered debates into imperial chambers. Doctrine would now carry political weight. He imagined the scene, robed bishops beneath imperial banners, arguing over words that would shape centuries. Homoousios, of the same substance, language as weapon, language as safeguard. He remembered his youth, when daemons lurked in fevered dreams and shadows. Now the struggle centered not on unseen figures, but on syllables. Yet beneath both lay the same anxiety. What, precisely, is real? He called for a scribe and dictated a letter, not to the emperor, not to a bishop, but to a distant nephew serving in a provincial office. I have lived, he began slowly, in an age when the gods seemed to withdraw and new certainties advanced. You will live in an age when certainty reigns. Guard yourself. He paused, gathering breath. Do not mistake definition for understanding. Do not mistake unity for peace. The sacred has never been domesticated without cost. He sealed the letter with a trembling hand. Later that day, Bishop Marcus requested an audience. They sat facing one another in the atrium. You did not attend the Christian liturgy this week, Marcus observed. I am old, Gaius replied. I attend my own thoughts more often. Marcus studied him carefully. You stand near the threshold. So I am told. Will you not step fully toward truth before you cross it? Gaius met his gaze without hostility. You ask me to abandon what formed me. I ask you to fulfill it. In what sense? Marcus leaned forward slightly. Your longing for coherence, your discomfort with silence, your recognition that the old rites no longer satisfy. These are movements toward the true God, or toward narrative, Gaius said quietly. Marcus frowned. You reduce faith to psychology. No, Gaius answered gently. I refuse to reduce psychology to sin. Silence hung between them. You fear surrender, Marcus said at last. I fear simplification, Gaius replied. Marcus exhaled slowly. You speak as if faith annihilates nuance. Does it not? Gaius asked softly. One God, one truth, one creed, one hope, Marcus countered. Hope. But the word lingered. Gaius closed his eyes briefly. I have hoped, he said, for signs, for voices, for restoration of what I once believed secure. None came. They came, Marcus insisted. You interpreted them as silence. Gaius considered this carefully. Perhaps the silence had not been absence but invitation. To relinquish reliance on empire, on marble, on ritual. Yet he could not shake the suspicion that Christianity's triumph was as much political adaptation as divine revelation. You are building something powerful, he said finally. Be wary. Marcus's eyes flashed. Of what? Of believing your victory ends anxiety. Marcus rose. Anxiety ends in Christ, he said firmly. Gaius did not argue. After Marcus departed, Gaius lay down upon his couch. He felt no demonic presence now. No shadow at the threshold. No whisper pressing against consciousness. The age of demons had passed into the age of doctrine. He drifted into sleep. In his final dream of consequence, he stood once more beneath the portico of his childhood home. Thunder rolled overhead. He lifted his face. This time, he did not wait for words. He simply stood in the storm. Rain soaked him. Lightning illuminated the sky, not as language, not as command, but as raw power. And in that brilliance, he understood something quiet and devastating. The gods had never been obligated to answer. It was Rome that had presumed reciprocity. Christianity had offered assurance in place of reciprocity. Both arose from human need. He woke with extraordinary calm. He no longer required thunder to speak. The silence was sufficient. Word arrived from Nicaea before summer ended. The creed had been written. Christ was declared of one substance with the Father. The term, homoousios, had been chosen carefully, fiercely contested, and finally imposed with imperial backing. Those who dissented were condemned, some exiled. Unity had been achieved. Gaius received the news not with shock, but with a long, slow exhale. So this was how anxiety resolved itself, not by dissolving, but by crystallizing. Where once men feared daemons lurking in thresholds, now they feared deviation from formula. Where once the cosmos felt crowded with ambiguous intermediaries, now it was structured, hierarchical, defined, guarded by creed. The demonic had not vanished. It had been relocated to heresy. He asked for Marcus. The bishop came promptly. "You have your unity," Gaius said when they were seated. "We have clarity," Marcus replied. "And the dissenters? Error divides the body, so they are cut away." Marcus did not deny it. "You have replaced multiplicity with precision," Gaius said quietly. "Do you feel peace?" Marcus hesitated, only slightly. "I feel alignment," he said. Gaius studied him closely. "And do you feel temptation?" "Temptation to what?" "To believe that you have ended ambiguity." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Truth is not ambiguous. Understanding is," Gaius answered gently. Marcus stood. "You are near death," he said, not unkindly. "Your reluctance is the last defense of pride." Gaius felt no anger. "Perhaps," he said, "or perhaps it is the last defense of honesty." After Marcus departed, the house fell into a quiet deeper than usual. Servants moved softly. Visitors came less often. The atrium felt wider. He walked slowly, painfully, to the household shrine. He knelt. For the first time in decades, he spoke the old prayer fully, from memory to Jupiter Optimus Maximus, not because he believed thunder would answer, but because it was part of him. When he finished, he did not feel fraudulence. He felt continuity. Then, after a long pause, he spoke a single line from the Christian text he had read months before. "The light shines in the darkness." He did not add commentary. He did not reconcile the two. He allowed them to stand side by side in the air. In that moment, he understood something about Lucius that had eluded him. Lucius had not merely believed. He had committed. Commitment was not the absence of doubt. It was the decision to act within a framework despite it. Gaius had never committed. He had observed, questioned, withheld. There was integrity in that stance. There was also isolation. Night fell early. He lay upon his couch and felt his breath grow shallow. No demonic shapes gathered. No luminous cross descended. Only memory. He remembered Marcus Aurelius, writing by lamplight. He remembered plague smoke rising in red dust. He remembered shadow at the threshold during fever. He remembered Lucius walking calmly to execution. He remembered Constantine entering Rome beneath a new sign. He remembered standing between temple and basilica, feeling the axis tilt. The age of anxiety had been real, not hysteria, not superstition. A deep, collective destabilization, political, metaphysical, psychological. The old world had not been destroyed by a single blow. It had been hollowed slowly until new meaning could take root. He had felt that hollowing in his own chest. He whispered into the dimness, "I have listened." The silence remained, but it no longer felt accusatory. It felt vast. If the old gods were masks, they had masked something real. If the Christian God was truth, that truth would not tremble at his hesitation. He did not need thunder. He did not need creed. He needed only this, that whatever ultimate reality existed, did not despise complexity. His breathing slowed. Outside, Rome continued. Councils convening, temples fading, churches rising, laws reshaping faith. Inside, an old Roman aristocrat released his final hold on certainty. He did not convert. He did not renounce. He died as he had lived in later years, between. And in that between, the moral ambiguity of an age remained intact. The gods had seemed silent. Perhaps they had been patient. Perhaps the silence was the final mercy. They washed his body in silence. The household had served the Valeri for generations. Even in this altered Rome, where Christian prayers rose from basilicas and imperial decrees named a single god, the old domestic rituals persisted in private spaces. They closed his eyes. They placed coins upon them, not because anyone believed Charon waited, but because continuity demanded gesture. Outside, Rome moved without pause. News of Nicaea continued to circulate. Bishops debated implications. Imperial scribes copied the creed into formal registers. Some rejoiced in clarity. Others muttered about overreach. The sacred had become centralized. In the weeks following his death, a small dispute arose within his household. His nephew, recipient of the final letter, arrived from the provinces. He had embraced Christianity publicly. He admired Constantine. He respected Marcus the bishop. He stood before the atrium shrine and hesitated. "Should we remove these?" he asked quietly. The steward, who had known Gaius since youth, shook his head. He never removed them. But he did not light incense, the nephew pressed. "No," the steward agreed. He listened. The nephew frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" The steward did not answer. Instead, he pointed toward the couch where Gaius had often sat at dusk. He listened to what was not spoken. The nephew stood still for a long time. Rome itself stood in similar tension. Temples remained, but their funding thinned. Vestal virgins aged without replacement. Priests continued rites, but their sons increasingly sought office through Christian patronage. The old gods were not toppled. They were outlived. Christian basilicas expanded. Clergy administered charity with bureaucratic efficiency. Bishops mediated disputes once handled by magistrates. Faith, once personal and precarious, now possessed structure backed by law. Anxiety had shifted form again. No longer fear of demons at the threshold. Now fear of deviation within orthodoxy. Heresy replaced haunting. The nephew attended a sermon by Bishop Marcus weeks after Gaius's death. Marcus spoke of victory, not military conquest, but spiritual triumph. "The darkness has receded," he proclaimed. "The demons are exposed. The empire now aligns with truth." The congregation responded with solemn affirmation. The nephew listened and felt something unsettled in his chest. He remembered his uncle's letter. Do not mistake definition for understanding. Do not mistake unity for peace. After the sermon, he approached Marcus. "My uncle respected you," he said. Marcus inclined his head. He resisted until the end. "Did he?" Marcus paused. He wrestled. "Was that failure?" the nephew asked. Marcus's eyes softened slightly. "No," he said after a moment. "It was honesty." The nephew felt relief and confusion. "If truth is clear," he ventured carefully, "why did he not see it?" Marcus looked toward the altar. "Clarity does not erase temperament," he said. "Some souls are built to stand at the threshold." The nephew thought of the atrium shrine, Jupiter in clay, untouched. "Is that dangerous?" he asked. Marcus considered the question. "It can be," he admitted. "Ambiguity can drift into indifference." "And certainty," the nephew pressed. Marcus met his gaze. "Certainty can drift into cruelty." The words hung between them. The nephew returned to the house and stood once more before the shrine. He did not remove the figures. He did not light incense. He did something different. He opened the Gospel of John and read aloud in the atrium. "In the beginning was the Word." The clay figures stood silent. The words rose into open space. Nothing shattered. Nothing protested. The nephew closed the scroll and felt, not conflict, but coexistence. Rome had not been remade overnight. Transformation had been layered, ritual upon ritual, symbol upon symbol. Gaius had lived in the fissure. He had felt the destabilization before it became doctrine. He had sensed demonic fear when the cosmos seemed porous and unreliable. He had witnessed the shift from multiplicity to singularity. He had died without resolving the tension. And perhaps that was the final lesson. An age of anxiety does not end when one system triumphs. It ends when fear is acknowledged as part of the human condition. The gods may grow silent. New gods may speak loudly. But the interior struggle, the wrestling between inherited forms and emerging meaning, remains constant. Rome would continue its path. Temples would close slowly. Basilicas would rise higher. Creeds would harden. Empires would fracture again. And somewhere, in some quiet atrium or dim basilica, another soul would listen, wondering whether silence was absence or depth. Gaius Valerius Marcellus had not solved the tension. He had embodied it. And in that embodiment, the spiritual collapse of pagan confidence and the rise of Christianity were not abstract movements, but lived experience. The age of anxiety had passed into the age of conviction. But beneath conviction, anxiety remained. It always would. Years passed. Constantine moved his capital eastward, toward Byzantium, renamed Constantinople. Rome remained symbolic, but the pulse of imperial power shifted. The city that had once believed itself eternal began to feel like a monument to memory. Christianity no longer required defense. It required administration. Bishops adjudicated disputes once handled by praetors. Clerical courts emerged. Wealth flowed into church holdings. Imperial patronage strengthened one theological faction over another. The nephew, Publius Valerius, watched this with mixed awe and unease. He had inherited his uncle's estate, and, unexpectedly, his uncle's questions. He attended councils, listened to sermons, corresponded with provincial officials. He admired the moral discipline Christianity demanded: chastity, charity, mercy. He respected its capacity to unify diverse provinces under shared confession. Yet he could not entirely shake the memory of Gaius standing between shrine and basilica, unwilling to extinguish one before embracing the other. The old temples grew quieter. In the Forum, weeds began pushing between paving stones. The Temple of Saturn saw fewer offerings. The Capitoline steps remained majestic but less crowded. No one stormed them. They were simply left behind. Publius visited the Capitoline one evening at dusk. The statue of Jupiter still stood, massive and serene. But the atmosphere had changed. No anxious crowds pressed forward with desperate sacrifices. No frantic pleas for plague to end or borders to hold. Instead, the space felt almost contemplative. He stood before the statue and felt, not devotion, but gratitude. Gratitude for what Rome had been, for centuries of civic coherence, for rituals that had bound community, for myths that had shaped imagination. Then he walked to a nearby basilica. Inside, candles burned steadily. The faithful gathered not in fear but in routine devotion. The bishop spoke not of demons, not of persecution, but of moral reform and social order. The sacred had stabilized again. Anxiety had receded, not eliminated, but absorbed into structure. Publius knelt. He believed in Christ. He believed the creed. Yet as he bowed his head, he sensed that belief alone did not erase complexity. He remembered his uncle's final words: "Grant me honesty." Honesty did not require rejection of faith. It required humility within it. Outside the basilica, a philosopher lectured to a small group beneath a colonnade. Neoplatonism still alive, still seeking assent beyond dogma. Publius paused to listen. The one, the philosopher said, cannot be captured by language. It exceeds our formulations. A young Christian interrupted sharply. That is why God revealed himself, so we would not wander in abstraction. The philosopher smiled gently. Revelation is received through interpretation. The Christian frowned. The conversation continued, measured but tense. Publius felt the old fissure again, not as crisis, but as ongoing dialogue. The empire had not replaced one absolute with another seamlessly. It had layered meanings. Christianity had triumphed politically. Philosophy persisted intellectually. Pagan memory lingered culturally. The demonic fear of Gaius's youth had diminished. But new anxieties emerged. Fear of schism, fear of imperial overreach, fear of corruption within the church. Anxiety never vanished. It migrated. Publius returned to the house and stood once more before the atrium shrine. The clay figures remained. Dust had gathered lightly. He lifted Jupiter in his palm, just as Gaius once had. He did not worship. He remembered. Then he placed the figure back and turned toward the cross, mounted on the wall nearby. A simple wooden symbol, not ornate. He bowed his head. In that moment he felt not contradiction, but continuity through transformation. Rome had changed gods before, absorbing Greek deities, adapting foreign cults. This shift was deeper, more exclusive, but even so, it carried echoes of adaptation. Christianity had taken Roman roads, Roman law, Roman administrative genius, and infused them with its narrative. Perhaps that was inevitable. Empires reshape gods, gods reshape empires. The age of anxiety had been the crucible. Gaius had lived inside the crucible. Publius lived in the cooled metal that remained. The question was no longer whether the gods were silent. The question was whether certainty could remain compassionate. He resolved quietly that in his service, both civic and religious, he would guard against cruelty born of conviction. He would remember that doubt had once been honest, not sinful. He would remember that his uncle had listened. Rome would move forward. New generations would grow up never having felt the old instability, never having feared daemons in fevered rooms. But history leaves sediment. Beneath the confidence of Constantine's empire lay the memory of collapse, of silence, of shadow. And that memory, though muted, would shape future crises. The sacred had been renegotiated. It would be renegotiated again. Time did what emperors could not. It thinned passion. By the time Publius entered his later years, Constantine was dead. His sons divided the empire. The cross remained upon imperial standards. The old sacrifices once tolerated began to narrow under new decrees. What had been eclipse turned slowly toward exclusion. Temples closed, not violently, but administratively. Funding redirected. Priesthoods left unfilled. Vestal fires allowed to gutter out quietly. Rome did not scream. It adjusted. Publius walked one final time through the Forum in late autumn. Wind carried dry leaves across worn stone. The Basilica Julia stood partly in shadow. The temple of Vesta's hearth was cold. He felt a strange ache. Not rebellion, not anger. Ache. This was the Rome his uncle had loved and questioned. The Rome that had trembled beneath plague and civil war. The Rome whose gods had once seemed unassailable. Now they lingered like inscriptions on weathered stone, visible, but no longer authoritative. He paused before the Capitoline temple. A small group of older citizens stood at its base, murmuring softly. No incense burned. No animals were led forward. One of the men, a veteran, scarred and stooped, looked up at Jupiter's statue and said quietly, "He was enough for us." Publius did not interrupt. Enough. The word lingered. Christianity had not merely replaced the old gods. It had reframed sufficiency. The new faith claimed universality, moral, metaphysical, eternal. It offered coherence beyond empire, salvation beyond civic honor. But had it erased the human need for layered meaning? Inside a nearby church, a sermon warned against lingering pagan sympathies. The demons hide in nostalgia, the bishop cautioned. Publius flinched slightly. Demons. The word returned, but transformed. In Gaius's youth, demons had been shadowed presences at the edge of perception, beings that filled the silence left by destabilized cosmology. Now demons were assigned to memory itself, to attachment, to hesitation. Anxiety had shifted again. He visited the house that had once belonged to his uncle. The atrium was quieter now. The clay figures of the lair still stood, dustier than before. No one had dared remove them entirely. Publius lifted Jupiter once more. This time, he carried the figure to a small chest and placed it gently inside. Not discarded, not smashed. Preserved. He closed the lid. Then he turned to the cross on the wall and knelt. He did not pray for triumph. He prayed for mercy, for the empire, for the church, for those who remembered. In that prayer, he felt the faint echo of his uncle's final posture, kneeling not in surrender to dogma, but in acknowledgement of mystery. Outside, the empire moved forward under Christian emperors. Laws against sacrifice tightened. Public paganism receded into private recollection. Philosophers continued quietly, but their influence waned. The sacred had narrowed. Clarity had won. Yet, beneath clarity lay sediment, the memory of uncertainty that had forged it. The age of anxiety had not been an aberration. It had been transition. Rome had required collapse of confidence to embrace new coherence. Gaius had embodied the collapse. Publius embodied the coherence. But coherence, too, would face fracture in centuries to come. Faith, institutionalized, becomes power. Power invites corruption. Corruption revives anxiety. The cycle endures. As dusk settled over Rome that evening, Publius stepped into the street and listened. No thunder, no whisper, no demonic pressure at the edge of awareness. Only the distant chant of evening prayer rising from multiple basilicas across the city. The sound was steady, unified. He felt comfort. He also felt vigilance, for he remembered his uncle's lesson, not to mistake unity for peace. The gods had seemed silent. Christianity had spoken loudly. But silence and speech were not opposites. They were movements within the same human longing to know whether existence was governed by purpose or abandoned to chaos. Gaius had never resolved that longing. He had held it honestly. Publius closed his eyes briefly in the gathering dark. "Grant us humility," he whispered. The chant continued. Rome exhaled. Rome did not fall. Not yet. Not. It thinned. It shifted. It relocated its center. But it endured. Years after Publius sealed the clay Jupiter in a chest, he walked slowly along the Via Sacra with a cane in hand. He had grown older than his uncle had been. The generation that remembered the plague under Marcus Aurelius was gone. The generation that trembled during the crisis of the 3rd century had passed into memory. Children now learned the creed before they learned Virgil. The silence Gaius had feared no longer troubled Rome. The city was filled with words, creeds recited in unison, homilies proclaimed from marble pulpits, imperial edicts invoking the Christian God by name. Silence had been conquered by declaration. And yet, Publius paused before the forum at twilight. The stones held warmth from the day's sun. The air was still. He closed his eyes. For a moment, just a moment, he felt something like the old tension his uncle had described in letters never meant for public reading. Not fear of demons, not doubt of doctrine, but awareness that every system of meaning rests upon mystery. He opened his eyes. The temples stood quieter than ever. Some were repurposed, some neglected, some preserved as monuments. He felt no impulse to restore them. He felt no desire to burn them either. Instead, he understood something that neither Gaius nor Marcus had fully articulated. The sacred does not disappear when its forms fade. It migrates. In the 2nd century, the gods had been civic, public, intertwined with empire. When empire fractured, confidence in those gods fractured with it. Anxiety filled the gap. Daemons populated imagination. Fear pressed against sleep. In the 3rd century, instability sharpened that fear. The cosmos seemed porous. Shadows felt near. In the 4th century, Christianity provided structure, narrative, doctrine, hierarchy. It named the demons, condemned them, and absorbed anxiety into a singular story of redemption. But beneath every structure, human longing remained. Publius entered a basilica as evening lamps were lit. The chant began. He joined it. His voice, aged and thin, merged with others. He believed. He believed in Christ, in resurrection, in moral accountability before a single God. Yet belief no longer required erasure of memory. When he prayed, he sometimes recalled thunder over the Caelian hill, imagined by a boy waiting for Jupiter to speak. He did not interpret that memory as deception. He interpreted it as formation. His uncle had died without choosing fully between shrine and cross. Some called that weakness. Publius now saw it as witness. Witness to a civilization in transition. Witness to the psychological truth that certainty often grows from collapse. Witness to the moral danger that certainty, once enthroned, can harden into severity. After the chant ended, Publius remained kneeling. The basilica emptied slowly. Candles flickered. He spoke softly, not to Jupiter, not to demons, not to abstractions, but to the God he now confessed. Preserve us from cruelty born of confidence. He paused, and from despair born of silence. He rose with effort and stepped back into the Roman night. Stars shone faintly above the city. The same stars Gaius had watched in anxious youth. The same stars Marcus Aurelius had contemplated while writing about endurance. The same stars beneath which Constantine had marched toward vision. The heavens had not altered. Interpretation had. Publius walked home slowly. As he passed the old house, he paused at the doorway. Inside, the atrium lay quiet. The chest containing the clay Jupiter remained tucked beneath the bench. He did not open it. He did not need to. Memory was no longer threat. It was inheritance. He understood, finally, that the gods had not gone silent in Gaius's youth. Rome's expectation had grown louder than the cosmos. Christianity had answered that expectation with narrative and promise. But narrative did not eliminate mystery. It framed it. The age of anxiety had ended not because fear vanished, but because fear found language. Yet language would one day fracture again. Empires rise, creeds harden, certainties age, and somewhere, in some future century, another soul would feel the sacred grow distant, and the world grow unstable. Another aristocrat, another citizen, another human. They would ask whether the gods had gone silent, and the answer would not thunder from the sky. It would emerge quietly, in the tension between memory and hope. Publius looked up once more at the dark sky. He did not wait for speech. He did not fear silence. He walked forward beneath it.